Welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka OMG Tarot. I hope you enjoyed the year ahead spread I covered last week. It's a really good one, and as I mentioned, I get a lot of mileage out of it. And if you did the spread yourself, I hope you're satisfied with what you pulled for this year. I know sometimes certain cards can be a bit discouraging, like, say, the Three of Swords or the Five of Pentacles, and sometimes those cards end up expressing themselves in ways that you couldn't have predicted at the beginning of the year. Like maybe you pulled the Five of Pentacles and you freaked yourself out a bit, worrying, oh no, am I going to have a health problem arise? Or am I going to end up losing a lot of money? And then the month for which you pulled the Five of Pentacles rolls around, and neither of those things happen. Maybe you simply find yourself between jobs, which can still be a very uncomfortable thing, and it can absolutely be a destabilizing thing. But you might never have thought that would be how your Five of Pentacles plays out. You might also find yourself encountering the shadow sides of cards. I think there's going to be an episode in the future about the shadow sides of cards, but the quick and dirty of it is think of the shadow of each card as the inverse of it and the dark side of that card's point. I have a friend who actually encountered this with her year ahead spread last year. She pulled a number of Pentacles cards, high number ones too, like the 9 and the 10, and she was very excited that she was going to be grounded and stable and making a lot of money in that fall. And all of us were happy for her. We were like, hey, that's wonderful, good. But then what ended up happening was people kept asking her for money. And she wasn't building that strong foundation, but rather being treated as one for the others in her life. So she still had those Nine of Pentacles themes of, I have abundance and I have what I need, but the way it ended up manifesting was others recognizing that and then coming over to her with their hands out like, hey, so can you spare a bit? This is why I think it's helpful to write down what you think each card means when you initially do the spread, and then to revisit them month by month and write down what ended up actually happening. You might see patterns emerge, and you might surprise yourself. And as always, if you have any questions about your year ahead spread or you're feeling confused, my inbox is always open. Now let's dive into today's topic, one of the most frequently requested topics I've gotten for this podcast. How do you take the cards you pull in a spread and turn them into a coherent narrative? Put another way, let's say you do a 3-card spread. You pull the Six of Pentacles, the Eight of Wands, and the King of Cups. Your first inclination might be to interpret these individually. So we start with our Six of Pentacles. We have a sense of balance in the material world, and perhaps a sense of fairness not only to others but to yourself. Then we have the Eight of Wands. So you might interpret this as leaning all the way into your passion and feeling absolutely lit up by the things that drive you and spark you and really get you excited about your life. And then with our King of Cups, you might interpret that as being very emotionally expressive and one who has absolutely no qualms about sharing what you're feeling and really allowing yourself to become grounded and rooted in those feelings. So you might say to yourself, that's great. I've done a tarot card reading, but what's the meaning? How does this answer my question or provide me with insight? And then when you encounter a reader who is really adept at putting cards into a story, you might look back on readings like this and feel a bit inadequate, or kind of like, all right, how do I get from what I'm doing to what they're doing? My first tip is this. What kinds of cards did you pull? And by that I mean major or minor arcana. Before anything else, take a look. Are we dealing with major arcana themes here, which are big picture overarching themes? Or are we dealing with minor arcana themes, which are more of your mundane, day-to-day things that you do? You might have both. And when that's the case, typically I read the minor arcanas as nesting under the majors. Here's a quick example. Let's say you pull both the Ace of Swords and Death. We know the Ace of Swords is brand new insight because swords are all about thoughts and knowledge, and an ace is something brand new. We also know that death is a very necessary ending that paves the way for rebirth. So when I say nesting a minor arcana under a major arcana, I might interpret these together as the new insights that you're developing as you go through this period of an ending that sets you up for a rebirth. You're currently undergoing a death moment, one where you're clearing out what's not serving you and making space for something that's better and healthier. And in doing that, you're having these Ace of Swords moments where you're discovering things about yourself and about the situation you're in, and maybe about things that are tangentially related to it, like others involved in this clearing out, or you're gaining clarity on what comes next. What do you actually need to make room for? And then within this spread, if we have a third card, we can take it a step further. Because you might be wondering, all right, I'm in this period of clearing out and making space for a new transition, and I'm gaining insights about it. But what area of my life is this clearing out and transitioning happening in? Let's say, for example, you pull the Seven of Cups. That card can symbolize feeling like you're being pulled in a lot of different emotional directions. It can also feel like you're facing a whole buffet of options and you're not quite sure which one to go with because, on the one hand, they all look delicious, and at the same exact time, none of them is grounded or rooted in anything. On the Rider-Waite-Smith, this is the one where the character is looking at a whole bunch of cups floating up in the sky. One's got a dragon in it, one's got some candy in it, one's got a person underneath. They look like they're wearing a ghost costume. That one. And on a lot of other cards, there's a very similar depiction where it's this idea of I know I'm living in my feelings and this fantasy land and not really looking at things that are necessarily logical and grounded, but nonetheless, they're things that have emotional ties to me and they make me feel some sort of way. So I'd probably read this series of cards, our Ace of Swords, Death, and the Seven of Cups, as finally gaining clarity about why you can't see things logically and in a grounded manner. I might see this as understanding that you tend to be a bit of an overthinker because you're so feelings oriented, and that by recognizing this, you're making the conscious decision to cut that or at least mitigate it so that way you can have a stronger grip on what are you experiencing and what should you choose, and ultimately, how can you assess the things that you're considering pursuing. After all, do you want the candy? Do you want the dragon? Do you want the guy in the ghost costume? The Ace of Swords will help you determine which one of those is best for you. Now, side note, because I realize I'm a bit didactic on this podcast, tarot has a lot of subjectivity to it, as you know. So please just keep in mind that when I'm doing these more instructional episodes, I'm sharing my methods with you. I'm not saying that you absolutely have to use my method, or that if you come upon something else that works for you, that's wrong or ineffective in any way. I know you know that, and I probably didn't even need to say it, but I just wanted to assure you all that the more you work with your cards, the more you're going to develop your own style and your own relationship with them. And that might end up looking very different from my style, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So please take these episodes as a jumping off point and a bit of guidance, not necessarily a you must do it this way regulations manual. And in fact, other side note, I have a pretty fun anecdote about that. Readers often get readings from each other. It's fun. People ask me all the time, why do you go to other tarot card readers when you yourself know what you're doing? And for me, it's because I like to experience how somebody else works with the cards, and I want to hear what some other reader has to say, because they're going to pick up on things that I might miss, and similarly, I'm going to pick up on things that they might miss. Although when I'm in the querent seat, not the reader seat, I zip it. Just, if you're a reader getting a reading by somebody else, let them do their thing. Don't cut in and interject and read the cards for them. I've had people do that to me as well, and it's like, what are you paying me for? You sat down at my tarot booth and now you're reading the cards? Like, that's cool, I'll sit here quietly, but I almost feel like you shouldn't be paying me for this. But anyway, last year, a fellow reader that I know was offering up readings, and I took her up on it. I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to. I've never actually sat with you for a reading, and I'd like to hear what your style is like. She had a magpie style deck, which, if you don't know what that is, that's a very different way of looking at and building a tarot deck. You literally craft your own deck by individual cards and discards from others. So you might end up with a 50 card deck, you might end up with a 100 card deck, And they're all going to be from different decks. So you might have a Deviant Moon in there. You might have a Carnival at the End of the World in there. You might have a couple Marseilles, a couple Rider-Waite Smiths, maybe a Hermetic or a Toth card. And then you might also have a bunch of Oracle cards in there. So you're flipping cards and it's like, hey, there's the Ace of Cups. Oh, hey, there's the dawn of a new day. It's very chaotic, and it is so not my style. And I think it was exactly what I needed that day, because she and I sat together and she was bringing up cards and slinging them, and she was coming up with a lot of really intriguing things and really good points for me to hear and to focus on. And never in a million years would I have come up with that myself, just because my style tends to be a bit more linear and a bit more traditional and largely focused on what's the tangible takeaway here? Why did I do this tarot card reading? And what's the overall point? I've also been a content and copywriter for like 10 years now, so there's always a call to action at the end. You need your call to action at the end. If there's not a call to action, what are you even doing here? But also on that point, think about how your professional experiences might shape how you read the cards. Perhaps if you've been a teacher for a long time, you might tend to do a lot of instructing and explaining through your cards. Or if you're a marketer, you might have to tack a call to action on the end. Another reader I know is also a Reiki master and longtime yoga practitioner and teacher. And her style is so flowy and so vibey and so focused on making you feel good and finding a holistic answer to whatever it is you've sought out an answer to. So, we all bring influences from the other parts of our lives into our tarot card readings. I think that's just human. And I think being aware of it can both help you identify when and where you're using that as a strength versus a crutch. And I think it can also help you articulate your own style better, which then can help you develop your own style better. Maybe I'm just somebody who needs to be able to talk through something and able to understand it better. I do have a big-ass stellium in my third house. But that might work for you too if you're able to talk it out and hear it. So, bonus tip, because it's not super pertinent to our topic today of how do you make a narrative, but I think it's valuable nonetheless. Try to understand your own style and allow your style to evolve and change, because it will. All right, on to tip number 2. Who are the characters in this reading? Typically, whoever the reading is for is who the reading is about. So, for example, if you're doing a reading for yourself, trust that this is about you. I know that sounds super obvious, but here's where that gets a little more complex. Let's say you're asking about a potential relationship, and to bring it back to our initial example, you pulled the 6 of Pentacles, the 8 of Wands, and the King of Cups. We've talked before about how the court cards symbolize people, and how sometimes they symbolize the persona that you're being asked to take on in a reading. So if we're asking about a potential relationship, are you that King of Cups, or is the King of Cups somebody else? Or is the King of Cups the relationship as a whole? I don't subscribe to that last one. Court cards are personalities and personas, and in the interest of interpreting a couple of cards as a narrative, this is one of the characters. To figure out whether the querent or the person they're potentially in a relationship with is being symbolized by the King of Cups, I would typically describe the traits of the King of Cups to determine who does this sound more like, and which person in this relationship is playing the role that best aligns with the King of Cups. But that's not really what this episode is focused on. In terms of dropping this into the narrative, I would see this court card as one of the characters playing out the action. In this spread, we have 3 minor arcana cards, 2 of which are not court cards. I would read those 2 non-court cards as the what, and the court card as the who. So as far as this being a relationship spread, I would read this as an individual in this relationship is being extremely emotionally expressive, and as the king, is very grounded in those emotional expressions, potentially even being the one who's feels like they're responsible for leading this relationship emotionally. They're the one making the call on when are we reaching certain milestones? What are and aren't we going to say and do? How are we expressing ourselves? There's definitely somebody here who's taking charge in the emotional department of this relationship. And what are they doing as they act in that manner of the King of Cups? Well, it feels like they're sharing their resources. They got the Six of Pentacles, and they're doing a lot of balancing and a lot of distribution of material and tangible things. They also got the Eight of Wands, so we know that they're extremely passionate about what they're doing. Whoever this person is, they give and give and give, and it pays off, literally, for the person that they're giving it to. I'm actually starting to read some sugar daddy dealies into this. And maybe that's not the case, but I'm definitely seeing some room for potential manipulation here because while this figure is very emotionally expressive, it feels like they are potentially using that to control the relationship and that they're following that up with a lot of material giving. And they're very adamant about you're going to take what I buy you and what I set up for you and everything that I give you, and it's all coming out of love. Maybe the reading manipulation into it is a bit of a projection on my part. I don't know. And maybe it's not. That's just the feeling I'm getting from these three cards together. But pay close attention to how we've designated the who in this story and the what in this story. In fact, when you're trying to interpret cards as a narrative, it can be very helpful to always think of it from that story framework. Think about the elements of a story. Every story has the following 5 elements: plot, character, conflict, setting, and theme. And you might find resources that add more elements like point of view. Thinking about your tarot card reading with this framework can help you answer questions and get those intuitive muscles working. This is what brings you from reading off definitions to building a story and finding meaning and ultimately answering any questions and providing any insight that you or your querent are seeking. Let's test that out by applying it to our example spread. First, the character. Who is the character here? We identified the King of Cups. So our main character is somebody who is very emotional, rather grounded in their emotions, and someone who's able to take charge and take control in that flowy, watery, emotional realm. Next, we have the setting. Where is this taking place? Take a look at where all the figures on your tarot cards are literally standing, or sitting, or lying. I'm going to reference the Rider-Waite-Smith deck here, but apply this to any deck that you work with. On our Six of Pentacles, things look grounded. People are standing on solid ground. In our Eight of Wands, we see more solid ground, but it's all the way in the background. And in this card, we see a hill, and we also see a winding body of water. Maybe we can read this as, yes, there is a clear demarcation of where the ground is and what's actually supporting us, but we might feel like we're a bit up in the air, just like these 8 wands. There's emotions at play here for sure, but it seems like what's more important is how grounded things are. You know where the ground is, and you can see the emotions from a bird's eye view. However, you yourself might not feel super grounded when interacting with the passion behind all of this resource sharing and all these emotional expressions. Now, what about where our King of Cups is? He's on a piece of concrete in the middle of the ocean. Perhaps we can read this as he's on solid ground, even though he is surrounded by feelings and emotional responses. So to put that all together, where are we? Well, we're somewhere that what is grounded and who is grounded is absolutely clear, but there is some sense of being a bit distanced from that groundedness. Next up, plot. What is going on? A lot of this comes from the question that you've asked. You've asked about a relationship. That's kind of general, kind of vague, but we can work with that. Going beyond the question, we can also read the plot by looking at these cards linearly, going left to right, just like you would read a sentence, which is typically how I read cards, unless I'm reading a specific spread. So if I'm doing, say, a Celtic Cross, I'm going to read the cards in the order that you're supposed to read them for a Celtic Cross. But when I just throw a set of 3 cards down, which is really something I do pretty frequently. I'm not a huge spread person. I use them, but only when they're for a very specific purpose. I read them left to right. So, left to right, we first have our Six of Pentacles where things are grounded and things feel fair. They feel like everybody's getting a cut that they need. And then after that, we move over to our Eight of Wands, which is where things start to feel a bit detached. This is where the wands are all up in the air, looking down at the water and the ground. So we might have a plot line that goes, hey, at first things feel very balanced and very hunky-dory and very materially supported, but then it feels like the passion behind it and all the effort that goes into creating that environment almost feels like it counterintuitively is pulling us away from a place of groundedness. Almost like it's a lot, too much, too fast, to the point that I'm no longer feeling as secure as I once did. And that's also giving me clarity about it. By forcing me to be up in the air looking down, I'm able to see every angle and every rock in that river. And then last, but I wouldn't typically make this a part of the plotline because we've established that our King of Cups is the character, but let's consider him anyway. We might also recognize just how surrounded he is by wishy-washiness and wateriness, despite being very grounded in himself. The area of what he's grounded in is actually rather small. So then we have conflict. What is the conflict here? And remember, conflict doesn't always mean fight. In any story, the conflict is what the character wants, and that could also be what the character doesn't want. Maybe the character is fighting against something, and what the character wants is to maintain the status quo. It's the whole reason why the story's happening. In a lot of ways, the conflict is the story. I know you probably didn't pop on this podcast expecting to go back to English class today, but here we are. And I know there was an episode in season 1 where I made a reference to OMG literary theory. Well, here we are. So anyway, what is our conflict here? I'm reading our two non-court minor arcanas, our Six of Pentacles and our Eight of Wands, together as the conflict. The conflict being recognizing how much of a healthy cut are you even getting? What is grounded? Where are you grounded? The conflict being, I want what I deserve, I want what I need, and now that I can see it clearly, am I getting those things? And perhaps, am I getting them with more than I'd bargained for? Perhaps I am getting nice gifts, dinners out, a general sense of financial security, but it's also coming with waves and waves of emotions that now I have to deal with. Then we get to theme, and in literature, theme is essentially what the story is about. The narrative is the plot point, so things like, we met, we began a relationship. He was very generous with all of the material items he gave me. The theme is the more figurative statement that the author is making through their work. So to illustrate that, because I know people sometimes get theme and narrative mixed up, think about the movie The Wizard of Oz. The narrative is that the tornado picks up Dorothy's house and plops her down in Oz, where everything is colorful, and she meets the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion, and they follow the Yellow Brick Road to eventually find the Wicked Witch of the West and defeat her so that way they can hold on to the ruby red slippers. Dorothy doesn't even know why she's holding on to these slippers. Her goal is to get home. And the good witch, Glinda, said, all right, the only way home is to go and find the wizard and he'll send you home. So Dorothy and her new friends defeat the Wicked Witch of the West, and they get to hold on to the shoes. Then they eventually find their way to the wizard, and initially he's just a big floating head and he seems really cool, but then they pull back the curtain and he's just some guy with a machine, and he's been rather rude to them, and they start to get a bit frustrated. They're like, Wizard, Dorothy just wants to go home. What's your deal? That makes him feel bad. And then it makes him admit that he's not even a real wizard. He's just a guy with a machine, and he doesn't have the power to grant them wishes. But then he also gives each of Dorothy's friends something that kind of sort of makes up for what they're after. And then the wizard says, I'm going to get in my hot air balloon, and I'm heading back to Kansas anyway, so Dorothy, why don't you hop in, and I'll drop you off at your house once we're back in Kansas. So she goes okay, But then her dog runs off and she runs after him, and the hot air balloon is in the process of taking off, and there's really no way for her to get back on it. So the wizard flies away, and she's stuck here in Oz, and she's very upset. But don't worry, Glinda the Good Witch comes back and says, "Oh, no worries, Dorothy. Just click your heels together and repeat after me. There's no place like home, and then you'll wake back up in your house. Like you've had the power to do that this entire time." So she does that, and it works. That's the plot of The Wizard of Oz. But that's not the theme. One of the themes is don't blindly trust authority because they have their own interests. Glinda could have told Dorothy really early on, just click your heels together, and avoided all that drama, but Glinda wanted Elphaba taken out, which is why she sent Dorothy on that quest. Elphaba being the name of the Wicked Witch of the West, by the way. I know not everyone knows that because that's not mentioned in the movie. But anyway, as the viewer, watching Dorothy go through this, you get this sense of she wasn't well served by just following the authority figure. That she was an unwitting pawn because she just went along with what the authority figure told her. And then later, when we see her encounter the wizard, we again see this theme expressed. She's expecting him, this all-powerful, all-knowing guy, to have the power to get her what she wants. So she appeals to authority, and then finds out he's just a guy. I think we can also read into this film a theme of things aren't always what they seem to be. That it's very easy to be manipulated by things that are flashy and fabulous. We see this literally in the scenes that are set in Kansas. They're in sepia tones, and then she gets to Oz, and it's beautiful and it's colorful. And ultimately, it's all fake. It's all a dream. So that's the difference between narrative and theme in literature. I think it's a very important distinction to make. And when you're reading tarot cards, think about theme in the same way that you might read the theme in a novel or a play or a movie. And one last thing, because I realized that was such a long tangent. If anything, if I could assign any tarot card to the Wizard of Oz, I'm thinking the devil. Because think about how the devil makes these false promises and elevates material wealth and material things over spiritual ones. If anything, I'm thinking Glinda and the wizard, and to a lesser extent, other characters and ideas in that movie, are very devilish. Tip 3. Where is everybody looking, pointing, and otherwise directing their energy? This ties in with our previous point about reading the cards linearly. I promise you this point isn't going to be as long as the previous one. Let's look back at our Six of Pentacles. There are 3 characters here. On the left, there's the figure with the wrapped head and the beige blanket, who has open hands and is looking up at the middle figure. The middle figure, the one decked out in red with the fancy hat, is making eye contact with the character on the left. Then over on the right, we have the guy in the blue blanket, who's also looking up at the figure in red, but he's not being looked at. Overall, we can read this as a very contained scene. The money and the support that it provides is being kept in a small, closed circuit. Nobody's gaze is going beyond this card. And in some other cards, the figure's gaze does look like it's going beyond its card's borders. But not this one. Perhaps we can read into this, keeping our question in mind, tell me about my relationship, that it's a very closed system, that perhaps our King of Cups is extremely generous with our querent, but maybe he's not always so generous with people outside this 2-person relationship. And maybe that's what makes the querent feel very supported and very special. After all, you're getting this one-on-one attention and support from this fabulously decked out figure in the middle. They're not looking beyond you, and they're not worried about anything else. Then our Eight of Wands, there are no people in it. I know we alluded to a top-down gaze earlier, but I'm reading that more as you, the person reading the cards, has a top-down gaze. Then we get our King of Cups. He's gazing off to his left. Positioned to the right of our Eight of Wands, he's looking away from our Eight of Wands. He doesn't want to engage with that, and though he's passionate and very, very into what he's doing, it seems his attention is cast elsewhere, Perhaps he doesn't want to call attention to just how much effort and time he's putting into his Six of Pentacles thing that he does. And if we want to pull back in the idea of right and left, giving and receiving hands, he's looking in the receptive direction. It seems like his gaze is more focused on what am I getting out of this relationship? Perhaps that's some of the reason why he's going so hard on the I want to give you things and I'm really passionate about this. Maybe I need to chill with this King of Cups bashing here, but that's what I'm reading, and a big part of why I'm reading it is also the order these cards have come out in. Take your King of Cups if you're following along with your deck, and move it to all the way on the left, so it's positioned to the left of our Six of Pentacles, and it's the first card in your 3-card spread. Now the story's a bit different. He's very intently focused on that Six of Pentacles. He's looking right at it. And he's nowhere near that Eight of Wands. That's not even on his mind. I think in this position, I'm ready to give him a much more charitable reading. So, tip number 3, pay attention to where everybody is looking and pointing and just seemingly directing their attention and their energy. All right, last tip. Don't overthink it. I know it's easier said than done, but when you're reading tarot, it's important to get out of your head as much as you can. I think this goes hand in hand with something I've said in a couple other episodes, which is trust yourself. Trust your interpretation and your intuition. If you're looking down at a series of 3 cards and from it you're getting a sense of you're in a relationship with somebody who uses their emotions in a manipulative way, and they also tend to give you lots of money and material things, and at first you might not have seen it clearly, but when you take a step back and really examine just how into this relationship they seem to be, you can clearly see how they're expressing themselves and how they're relating to you and what they're doing through their actions. Then trust that. Don't doubt yourself. And again, I know it's easier said than done. That's like telling someone, oh, well, have you just tried being happy? Like, I get it. It doesn't always work that way. It's not always so easy to just shut off that voice in your head that says, well, what if we wanted to look at it this way, and. But do your best. Commit to trusting your initial gut interpretation of a reading. Write it down if you have to. Maybe the best way for you to process that is to have it written onto some tangible paper in pen, or to speak it aloud. Remember, when you're just starting out, the stakes are non-existent. What happens if you get your tarot card reading wrong? Nothing. And I think in a lot of instances, even when you're not a beginner, the stakes are rather low. Worst case scenario, you misinterpret the spread. You get it wrong. Okay. I would so rather see a reader be confidently wrong because they trusted themselves than someone who talks themselves out of their interpretation because they aren't confident in what they're saying. And if you're worried that you're going to get it wrong when reading for someone else, don't read for other people yet. We all start reading for ourselves, so there's no shame whatsoever in building up that muscle and getting yourself ready before you start offering readings to your family and friends. And also, your family and friends are going to be pretty forgiving. If you get it wrong with your best friend, they know you're practicing, so what? Don't be so hard on yourself. So, don't overthink it. Just try your best, trust your intuition, and if you find yourself getting stuck, think back to the basic plot points of what is happening here. Look at the pictures, interpret who's in this story, what are the plot points, what are the themes. If you got major arcana cards, those can be a big clue to the theme. And if you don't have majors, you can still work it out. So, just read the cards, and if you need to remind yourself of what suit you're in or what number you're at, that can help you out too. Don't be afraid to strip your reading down to the very fundamentals of things like suits and numbers in order to figure out where in the plot are you and what's going on. So, I hope you found these tips to be helpful. These are the strategies that I rely on when I do readings, and I've always found them to really ground me, guide me, just enable me to interpret the cards more deeply. If you try them out and that's something new for you, let me know how that went. I honestly love feedback and I love hanging out with other readers and chatting with them. So definitely let me know. I think you all know where to find me by this point, but in case you're new to listening or you just want to hear it again, my website is omgtarot.com. And you can find me on Instagram where my handle is its underscore omg underscore tarot. I also have a TikTok that I might start doing some more things with now, and I have a Burgeoning YouTube channel. So you can listen to the podcast over there, and you can currently see my one video that's up, but that's going to change. I'm kind of getting into making videos, so check me out over there. And I think that about wraps it for this week's episode. I know it dropped a little late. I'm sorry about that. It's been a week over here at OMG HQ, so yeah, I'm trying to be back on our Thursday schedule, but it's out on Friday. It's out. Give me a follow so you get notified when the next episode drops, which ideally will be next Thursday, and if it isn't, maybe it'll be next Friday. So, alrighty, have a good one. As always, it was great talking with you, and we will talk soon. Bye-bye.